wow, I'm proud of him. You know, he's doing his thing. I always wanted to do that. I used to do things for my family to be proud of him.
The DNA test results came in and it says 99.9% DNA match that B. Howard is Michael Jackson's son.
A shocking DNA test supposedly proved Michael Jackson had a secret son, until the entire story started falling apart in public. In 2014, a live-streamed press conference claimed singer B. Howard was Michael Jackson's biological child, backed by documents showing a 99.9% DNA match. But within hours, investigators and online critics began exposing inconsistencies and evidence that the test itself may never have been legitimate. So, who really started one of the biggest paternity rumors in music history? And why has the story continued following B. Howard for more than a decade? Join us as we uncover the truth behind the Michael Jackson DNA controversy and B. Howard's response to the rumors.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is B. Howard. It seems a lot of people are speaking on my behalf. I've never self-proclaimed to be Michael Jackson's son. I'm definitely not suing the estate. I've been taken care of very well, and also I make my own cash.
The connection that made the claim credible. The claim that B. Howard is Michael Jackson's biological son was never purely a tabloid invention. It was built on real connections that gave it enough plausibility to survive debunking. And understanding those connections is the only way to understand why the story has lasted as long as it has. B. Howard's mother is Miki Howard, a genuine R&B star of the 1980s who charted multiple times with songs including Love Under New Management and Pillow Talk, and who moved in the exact same professional and social circles as the Jackson family. Joe Jackson, the patriarch of the Jackson family, managed Miki Howard during the 1980s, which placed her in direct, sustained proximity to Michael Jackson during the period when the paternity claim alleges the relationship occurred. This is not fabricated. Joe Jackson's managing Miki Howard is documented. The two families knew each other well. That is not evidence of anything except that the entertainment industry in Los Angeles in the 1980s was, in certain circles, a small world. The detail that the tabloid operation seized on most enthusiastically was a nickname. Miki Howard, during the period around 1982, reportedly went by the name Billie, a casual version of her given name. Michael Jackson released Billie Jean in January 1983, with the famous lyric, "The kid is not my son," and the tabloid press that amplified their claims treated the nickname as the Rosetta Stone of the entire theory. Miki was Billie. Billie was Billie Jean, and Billie Jean's kid, despite what the song explicitly says, was actually Michael's son. The logical problem with this is that "the kid is not my son" is not an admission concealed in denial. It is a denial. The song was written as a response to a real category of experience that Jackson described in multiple interviews, women who claimed paternity connections that he said were false, and treating a lyric that says, "The kid is not my son," as evidence that the kid was his son is the kind of reasoning that the conspiracy requires rather than supports. Howard was born on April 2, 1981, which places his birth in mid-1980, 2 years before Billie Jean was recorded and released. His mother's nickname, Billie, would have preceded the song by years rather than being inspired by it. His biological father, Elgin Johnson, has spoken publicly about the birth. "I know Brandon's my son. I was there in the delivery room. I have pictures of him being born. I got the records. I got everything." Elgin described a relationship with Miki Howard that predated any connection to Michael Jackson. His account has received considerably less coverage than the Jackson claim, partly because it is straightforwardly boring, and partly because Elgin Johnson is not Michael Jackson. The personal history of Howard's family provided the foundation for the claim. What triggered it was a man named Alki David, and one of the most comprehensive cases of celebrity DNA fraud in history. The most embarrassing hoax in tabloid history. On March 6, 2014, Alki David, the billionaire founder of Filmon.com, a streaming service that had previously generated publicity through various provocative stunts, held a press conference in Beverly Hills, at which he announced that he had obtained DNA evidence proving, with 99.999% certainty, that B. Howard was Michael Jackson's biological son. David claimed he had purchased Michael Jackson's dental impression at an auction from a Beverly Hills doctor. The impression was 30 years old, David said, but still contained sufficient DNA for testing. He produced a document showing the results. Corey Feldman, the former child actor and self-described close friend of Michael Jackson, who had later testified against him, was present at the reveal and appeared visibly shocked, saying, "Let me see that," when the results were announced. The event was streamed live on Filmon.com. Hundreds of thousands of people watched. TMZ, which had initially reported David's claims, began investigating the documentation the same day. What they found was swift, specific, and farcical. The DNA results document was allegedly issued by a laboratory in Ireland called DNA Lab, a name so generic it suggested a 5-second naming process. TMZ searched and could find no such facility anywhere in Ireland or elsewhere. A Google image search for DNA results produced documents with the same easily stealable format as the one David had presented. And then came the logo. A Google image search of the lab's logo returned results for Terminator Salvation, the 2009 Christian Bale film. A reverse image search confirmed it. The red double helix that appeared on the DNA results document was the same design used on promotional T-shirts for the Skynet resistance fighters in the post-apocalyptic Terminator sequel. The laboratory logo on the document proving Michael Jackson's paternity had been taken from a science fiction movie about robots. David's response to being caught was to claim that the DNA agency itself had added the logo to make it look pretty, and that lab documents are not pretty by nature. TMZ pointed out that this explanation did not address why making a document look pretty required stealing a logo from a science fiction franchise, or why results that were never supposed to be released publicly had been released at a Beverly Hills press conference live-streamed to hundreds of thousands of people. The Michael Jackson estate's lawyer, Howard Weitzman, told TMZ that the estate had never even heard from B. Howard, and that any deadline for claiming to be Michael's child had long since passed. The whole edifice collapsed within 24 hours of being constructed. What it left behind was a story that received massive publicity through its own debunking, which turned out to be exactly the kind of publicity it needed to persist. The hoax was exposed completely. But the story it had generated was now global, and the person it had generated the story about, B. Howard himself, was left to deal with the consequences of someone else's fraudulent claim carrying his name and face. What B. Howard actually revealed. B. Howard's initial response to the Alki David affair was a video statement issued within days of the press conference, in which he was direct and specific about his position. "I've never self-proclaimed to be Michael Jackson's son," he said on camera. "I'm definitely not suing the estate. I've been taken care of very well, and also, I make my own cash." He also issued a formal press release stating, "Despite recent allegations, I did not authorize the testing of my DNA to be compared to that of the late Michael Jackson, nor did I contact TMZ regarding the publication of this story." The statement was precise on the key points. He had not started the story. He had not authorized the DNA test for this purpose, and he was not pursuing the estate. These are the three things the coverage had claimed about him, and he denied all three. He did confirm, in that early statement and in subsequent interviews, that he had taken a DNA test at some point, but that it had been taken for different purposes than the ones David was claiming. He did not specify what those purposes were, and the gap between "I took a DNA test" and "I took a DNA test to prove I am Michael Jackson's son" is exactly the kind of gap that tabloid coverage tends to collapse. The fact that he acknowledges a test exists has been used by people determined to believe the claim as evidence that the results support it. The fact that he explicitly denied authorizing its use for this purpose and that the document David presented was demonstrably fraudulent has been treated by the same people as somehow compatible with the belief that something real was being covered up. In more recent interviews, B. Howard has addressed the broader weight of the claim with a more personal register than the press release language allowed. "It's hard to carry a legacy that you didn't ask for," he has said. "People always want to compare you to someone else, especially someone as iconic as Michael Jackson. But I've always wanted to carve out my own path and be recognized for my own talents, not just because of who people think my father is." The specific frustration in that statement, being recognized for his own talents, is the detail that gets lost in coverage that treats his music as secondary to the speculation about his parentage. He has been a working musician and producer since 2003. The paternity story arrived in 2014, when he was already 11 years into a professional career. The career preceded the story. The story has largely eclipsed the career. When asked directly in recent years whether he has undergone a paternity test and what it showed, he has declined to provide specifics while maintaining his position that his relationship with the Jackson family speaks for itself, a phrase that has been interpreted in opposite directions by opposite camps simultaneously. His supporters read it as a declaration of genuine closeness without the need for biological proof. His critics read it as deliberate ambiguity designed to sustain the mystery. What it actually is, given everything he has said alongside it, is the statement of a man who grew up around the Jackson family through his mother's professional relationship with Joe Jackson, who has genuine warmth for that family, and who is not interested in reducing that relationship to a tabloid debate about DNA. The question of what the physical resemblance actually means is the one that the claim keeps returning to, regardless of what the documentation shows, because the resemblance itself is genuinely striking. And striking resemblances generate their own logic in the absence of other evidence. Why the comparison has outlasted every debunking. The comparison between B. Howard and early 1980s era Michael Jackson, specifically the pre-surgery Michael Jackson of the Off the Wall and early Thriller period, has been made by a large enough number of independent observers that it cannot be dismissed as purely motivated reasoning. The facial structure, jawline, eyes, and stage presence are similar enough that people who encounter B. Howard's work without knowing anything about the paternity claim often make the comparison spontaneously. MTV Japan, in a 2010 review of his debut album Genesis, dubbed him the Prince of Pop, a title that implied he was heir to a certain king. His vocal quality and stage movement both carry qualities that genuinely recall Michael Jackson's performance style, whether or not there is any biological reason for it. He grew up in a household where his mother was a professional R&B singer managed by Joe Jackson, in a social environment saturated with the Jackson family's music and influence. A child who grows up hearing and watching a specific kind of performance absorbs it. That is not genetics. That is the environment and formation. His music career, independent of the paternity claim, demonstrates a range and professional credibility that the tabloid framing tends to obscure. He began producing for other artists in 2003, with credits on Genuine's Love You More in 2003, Neyo's Billboard 200-topping album In My Own Words in 2006, and Omarion and Bow Wow's collaborative album Face Off in 2007. These are mainstream, commercially significant credits at a time when he was in his mid-20s. His solo career launched in 2010 with Dance Floor, a track featuring contributions from Questlove and Benjamin Wright, and produced by The Roots. He released his debut album Genesis through Universal Records Japan the same year. His 2016 single, Don't Say You Love Me, reached number 11 on the Billboard Dance Chart. His 2017 single, Necesito Tu Amor, peaked at number 3 on the Billboard Latin charts. He performed to a sold-out stadium in Astana, Kazakhstan. He toured Germany in 2015 and performed at a virtual star festival in Beijing in 2018. His grandmother was Josephine Howard of the Caravans, the first gospel group to have a song played on secular radio, and his grandfather was Clay Graham of the Pilgrim Jubilees. He attended the Marva Collins Preparatory School in Chicago, an institution known for demanding academic excellence. He is, in other words, a person with a documented biography, a real family history, a legitimate professional career, and a life that exists independently of the question that has shadowed him since 2014. That fact rarely leads the coverage. The breadth of that career paints the picture of a musician who has deliberately built a global profile outside the American mainstream, partly because the American mainstream's primary interest in him has always been the paternity question rather than the music. He was selected to represent the United States at the Intervision Song Contest in 2025 with We Are Champions, though he ultimately had to withdraw due to what he described as unforeseen family circumstances. The Intervision contest, modeled on Eurovision but aimed at Asian and Central Asian broadcasting unions, is not a major event in the American cultural calendar, which is consistent with his career strategy. Building significance in markets that assess him on his work, rather than on who people believe his father might be. The career he has built, the statements he has made, and the specific way he has chosen to navigate the claim all point toward the same position, but the question of what the Jackson family itself has said and done in relation to him is the one that most coverage never gets to, and it is genuinely more interesting than the tabloid version of the story. The estate and what the silence actually means. The Michael Jackson estate's position has been consistent and unambiguous since the story first broke in 2014. Howard Weitzman, the estate's lawyer at the time of the original claim, told TMZ, "We've never even heard from him," adding that any deadline for claiming to be Michael's child had long since passed. The estate has never publicly acknowledged the claim as having any merit, has never opened discussions with B. Howard or his representatives about any biological connection, and has never been compelled to do so by any court. B. Howard himself has stated he is not suing the estate and has no plans to. The legal dimension of the claim, which was initially the most alarming aspect of it for the Jackson family, has remained entirely theoretical. The relationship between the Jackson family and B. Howard actually remains genuinely unclear from public information, and B. Howard's comments about it are the most interesting and least analyzed part of his public position. He has described the Jacksons as very close to me, like family, and said he has always been connected to the Jackson family in a deep way. He has spoken about the relationship with consistent warmth while declining to describe its specific nature. This is not the language of a man who was fabricating a connection for commercial purposes in 2014. Those people tend to be more dramatic about what they claim. It is the language of someone who genuinely knows these people, is genuinely fond of them, and is not interested in weaponizing that relationship either for or against the paternity claim. The alternate theory that has received some discussion is that B. Howard might be Joe Jackson's son rather than Michael's, a possibility that emerged from the specific details of Mickey Howard's management relationship with the elder Jackson and was reported in some British tabloid coverage. Joe Jackson managed Mickey Howard directly. He was in sustained personal contact with her throughout the 1980s. Joe Jackson's complicated relationship with paternity and fidelity throughout his marriage to Catherine is well documented. B. Howard has never publicly addressed this theory in specific terms, and it remains at the level of tabloid speculation, without documentation. But its existence is worth noting because it illustrates how the claim has always been less about B. Howard and more about the Jackson family's complex internal history and the public's fascination with that history. At 45, Brandon Howard has spent a significant portion of his career having the most prominent fact in any coverage of his work be a question about his parentage rather than an assessment of his music. The career he has built proves a level of professional accomplishment that most working musicians never approach. Unfortunately, it has been almost entirely obscured by a story he did not start, about a relationship he has neither confirmed nor denied in the way the coverage demands, and by fabricated evidence presented on a Terminator Salvation promotional t-shirt. What he has confirmed, across all of his public statements taken together, is a specific and coherent position. He grew up in close proximity to the Jackson family through his mother's professional relationship with Joe Jackson. He has genuine personal affection for that family. He has never publicly claimed to be Michael Jackson's son. He did not authorize the 2014 DNA circus. He is not and has never been pursuing the estate, and he would prefer to be assessed on his music. Do the resemblance and the connections mean something, or does the documented fraud end the conversation? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.